What's up, my guys? What's up, my girls? AKA my dear and beloved Danny Flois. It's good to be with you one time for the 10th time. I am your boy Danny Flo, your favorite podcast teacher. This is the Danny Flo podcast, where I teach you how you already philosophize and how you can do it better. I also teach you why I strength train and why you should too. I also teach you why I'm married and have kids and why we should be doing it as young as possible. And I also teach you why I'm Catholic and why that's the most important thing and why you should be Catholic too. And if you had to pick between strength training and Catholicism, pick Catholicism every time. 10 out of 10 recommend. Okay, cool. If you're watching me on YouTube and are a subscriber, first of all, thanks so much. I very much want you to keep watching. Please like and share the link to the video so you can help me grow my channel. If you're watching and you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. You will learn something even if you disagree with what I teach and how I teach it. For example, that might be the very thing that you will learn, that what I teach is garbage and I'm a horrible teacher, right? In your opinion. If you subscribe though, please also like and share the link so you can also help me grow my channel. Okay, cool. As of January 17th, 2020, so for about a month now, I'm on Apple Podcasts, which is exciting. I think Apple Podcasts is a huge platform for podcasts, so I'm hoping it will help me reach more people. Apple Podcasts is the latest platform I'm on, and so far, for the last month, it seems that that's where people have chosen to listen the most out of all the platforms because I was already available on other platforms. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe and consider leaving a review so you can help me reach more people. If you like the podcast but you're not crazy about it and you don't really care to leave a review, just leave a 5-star review anyways as a favor to me. I mean, if you don't care one way or the other, you think the podcast is okay, but if you miss an episode, it's not the end of the world for you. Just leave a 5-star review anyway, because even though you're not crazy about it, someone else that will find the podcast, maybe based on your review, eventually might be or will be, and you'd be helping me reach them. So it's a win-win if it makes no difference to you, and it would make a difference to a future potential listener. Okay, cool. If you follow me on Insta, at Danny Flo, by the way, DANI_FLO, then you already know that I did an IGTV for my followers that where I attempted to motivate them. And in that IGTV, I disclosed that I'm reading off of a Google document that I type up. I don't think that's a secret. I've disclosed it before I did that IGTV. I disclosed it in the first YouTube episode that I did for a Spanish episode of my podcast. It was the Spanish translation of the Fulton Sheen episode. So if you're bilingual and speak both English and Spanish and understand both English and Spanish, and you've listened to all of my episodes in English and then in Spanish, thank you so much, first of all. But then you already know that it's scripted, right? Some of you might not like it, but as I mentioned in the IGTV that I was just talking about, I'm not a professional public speaker. I'm an amateur podcaster and YouTuber, among other things, or as I like to say, tings. I think eventually, with time, I will be able to just press record and say what I want to say, but for now, this is the way that I've been able to collect my thoughts and have been able to say what I want to say, right? So all of my podcasts, both in English and Spanish, and all of my YouTube videos and all of the IGTVs have been scripted. So that explains why I don't look directly at the camera the entire time, and why I reach over the upper right hand corner of your screen. That's when I'm scrolling. Okay, cool. I'm going to talk about a chapter in one of Venerable Servant of God Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen's books. If you are asking yourself who, first of all, that's a great question. Second of all, go listen to my mini introduction to Fulton Sheen that I was just talking about. It's episode 12 and it's available on the YouTubes. It's actually the first YouTube video that I uploaded after the original YouTube video that I uploaded about 5 years ago, where I serenaded my wife. Back then she was just my girlfriend, and that's how I convinced her to be my wife. I serenaded her with a full Mexican band. That's also available for you to watch if you're interested. But episode 12 of my podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on Anchor. So finish listening to this episode and then listen to episode 12, and then this episode might make more sense. But before I get into it, here's an ad on how I started my podcast and how maybe you can start your own. Okay, cool. So at the end of November, I bought a book by Fulton Sheen titled Way to Happiness. It's a short book of about 170 pages, and even then I haven't finished it, and I've had it for 2 months. I'm about 126 pages in. There's a chapter in it titled Teenagers. I'm going to summarize that chapter for you, and then I'm going to ask you what you think about it, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of my own commentary throughout. I was going to provide in-depth commentary after I summarize it for you, but I think I'm going to save that for a future episode. I'm just going to say some things throughout and ask you guys what you think about it. But because I am going to tell you what I think throughout, I'm assuming that you care what I think, right? Because you know what I say is so iconic and immortal. All right, so the book was published in 1954. That's 66 years ago. So you might ask yourself, how is this relevant today? That's a great question. So further, Fulton Sheen was born in 1895. That's 125 years ago. And when this book was published, Fulton Sheen was about 59 years old. So he hadn't been a teenager for a long time when he published this. So what could he possibly teach us about teenagers? That's another great question. So those are 3 things, or as I like to say, tings, that I should try to address before the end of this episode. So let me summarize the chapter though, and let me break it down. Let me break down the book for you first before I summarize the chapter. So I already told you the author, Fulton Sheen. The title is Way to Happiness. The year it was published, 1954. So the book is broken down into 9 parts, and it's a total of 37 relatively short chapters. Like I said, the book is only about 170 pages long. So the parts of the book are the introduction, then Way to Happiness, work, love, children, youth, inner peace, giving, and man. The introduction stands alone, right? But then Way to Happiness, the first part after the introduction, is chapters 1 through 7. Work is chapters 8 through 10. Love is chapters 11 through 17. Children is only 2 chapters, chapters 18 and 19. Youth is chapters 20 to 23. Inner peace is chapters 24 to 28. Giving is chapters 29 to 31, and man is chapters 32 to 37. Okay, cool. I'm going to talk about the 5th part, which is the part about youth, and its 2nd chapter in that part, which is chapter 21 in the book, titled Teenagers. The chapter is only 4 pages long, from pages 97 to 100, and it's 6 paragraphs long. So what I would like to do is summarize each paragraph and give you what I think is interesting. Let's do this. I'm sure all 3 of you that stuck around so far are excited about this, and by all 3 of you I mean me, my wife, and my mom. Thanks for listening. You guys are the real MVPs. Alright, first paragraph. Fulton Sheen begins by pointing out that adolescence, or the teen age, is the time between the spring and summer of life. Realistically, the season of summer is after spring, and then after summer is the fall, and then after fall is the winter. So I guess the fall, metaphorically now, is when you're a middle-aged adult, and the winter is when you're elderly. So spring is when you're in your childhood, and the summer is when you're an adult, maybe even a young adult. So, and then eventually you're middle age. So yeah, teenagers would be between childhood and young adulthood, or just adulthood. Typically, with respect to teens, we break it down even further, right? An 11 or 12-year-old, sometimes considered preteens, and then a teenager is 13 to 19. At 18 in most countries, you're legally an adult, but at least in the US, an 18-year-old spends half of his or her 18th year of life in high school, right? But anyways, I'm spending too much time on the first sentence. Sheen continues by pointing out that before we reach the teen age, we have very little personality. But as soon as we reach the teenage, our emotional life begins to take the character of our environment. I think it's interesting that he points out specifically that it's our emotional life. He gives the example of water taking on the shape of what it's put into. So if you pour water into a cup, it takes the shape of that cup. He seems to be pointing out that teenagers are like that. When we were teenagers, we were like that, and that would include him when he was a teenager. So Sheen continues by pointing out that in our teenage years, we become conscious of ourselves and we begin to live in solitude. We want to be left alone, or we think we want to be left alone, or we feel we want to be left alone, one or any combination of those. Sheen continues by saying that many parents and teachers don't know how lonely teenagers are. We should pause right there. So earlier we asked how this could be relevant even though it's 66 years old. By this I mean this information. This information found in this chapter of this part of the book, right? Published 66 years ago. Well, this is at least one way. Let me repeat it. Sheen says that many parents and teachers don't know how lonely teenagers are. Well, if we asked teenagers today in 2020, right, do you think your parents and teachers understand you? We don't even have to specify. Do you think adults in general, for the most part, understand you? That's a great question, says I. I think they're likely to say no. I don't think my parents and teachers or adults in general understand me. And we wouldn't be hearing it from teenagers in 1954. We'd be hearing it from teenagers today, in the year 2020, right? But we're also hearing it, from a 59-year-old man from 66 years ago. So one possibility is that Sheen, through accrued wisdom from prayer and his academic training, he had a PhD in philosophy, and his priestly formation and his own personal study, knows how most teenagers feel and or think, right, through this accrued wisdom. Also, Fulton Sheen was a priest, so priests hear confessions, at least Catholic priests hear confessions. Some of those were from teenagers, I'm assuming, right? When I was a teenager, I went to confession a couple of times. I go a lot more now that I'm an adult and a practicing Catholic. So when you confess your sins, you're supposed to say number and kind, the kind of sin it is and the number of times you did it. But a lot of times as humans, I'm speaking from personal experience, we add backstory to the number and kind of sins we committed. Sometimes I've been guilty of this to try and reduce our culpability for committing that sin, or to gain some sort of sympathy, right? To gain sympathy for our brokenness or our weakness. Or sometimes we confuse, I've been guilty of this as well, and I don't think that I'm unique or special in this way, right? In this way specifically. Sometimes I've confused, and we confuse, confession for a session with a psychologist, which it's not. I'm there. If you go to confession, you're there. We're there to be absolved from our sins. But anyways, it could be that some teenagers confessed sins against the fourth commandment, right? Honor thy father and mother. And they could have said things like, I'm sorry I did it. I just don't believe my parents understand me. I don't know for sure. I'm just trying to reasonably speculate. Okay, cool. Sheen ends by saying that until we reach maturity, when we were teenagers, until we reached maturity, we experienced greater solitariness than at any other point in our lives. He also says once we reached maturity, our souls began to be weighed down by or with unrequited guilt. Full disclosure, I have no idea what unrequited means. I googled it and it says, quote, of a feeling, especially love, not returned or rewarded, unquote. So not return guilt, not rewarded guilt. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm sure Fulton Sheen is looking down on me, shaking his head. I'm sorry, good bishop, but the first part makes sense. If we're struggling to understand our environment and to understand our identity, and we don't think our parents or adults in general are being much help, then of course we would experience great solitariness. I struggle to pronounce that word. Apparently I struggle to pronounce word as well. I was trying to play it off, but what's the point? Okay, cool. Second paragraph. Sheen points out that during this time we project our personality, or what little personality we have. That's my addition. The what little personality we have. That's my addition, because when I was a teen, I didn't have much of a personality. I know that now in retrospect. Even now, I don't have much of a personality. But the more we projected our personality when we were teens, the further we got away from it. And he says that between the soul of a teenager and the world, it's as if there's a wall between them, between the teenager and the world. And he compares an infant that tries to coordinate his eyes and his hands and how difficult that is and how it takes time. The same with the teenager, right? It takes him or her, it took us a while to adjust to the world that he or she feels so strangely related to. So the reason for that, Sheen says, is so many things, or as I like to say, tings. So many things demand our attention. When we were teenagers, we were flooded by trends, new emotional experiences, and our dreams and our hopes. And Sheen says that all of these demand our attention and satisfaction. So we want to satisfy all of these things, right? And then Sheen says teenagers don't confide their emotional states to others, they just live. And he continues by pointing out that it's hard for adults to penetrate the shells that teenagers crawl into. Now, if you ask if you ask teenagers if they crawl into a shell, they would probably disagree. That, again, is me reasonably speculating. But I think if you were to ask, earlier we said if we ask teenagers, do you think your parents and teachers understand you? What would they say? Well, now the flip side, if we ask parents, do you think that teenagers, crawl into a shell? I think most of them would say, yeah, I do. So that's interesting, right? So Sheen says the teenager, when he crawls into this shell, and because there's a wall between the teenager and the world, that they're similar to Adam after the fall from grace. So before I continue, I just noticed I'm saying Sheen says like a lot. I also say like a lot because I'm from the 90s, but I don't know how else to summarize this without saying Sheen says a lot, so please bear with me. Okay, cool. So Adam hid from discovery from God, his creator, after the fall from grace, and a teenager hides his discovery from their parents. That's how that's related. Third paragraph. Sheen points out that along with loneliness, there's a great desire to be noticed. So those are two conflicting desires, right? Or not necessarily a desire, not necessarily a desire. There's a desire to be noticed, and then there's a presence of loneliness. According to Sheen, this is because egotism is a vice that needs to be mastered early. Excuse me, I hope that didn't sound disgusting. Egotism is a vice that needs to be mastered early in youth. Sheen points out that the desire to be noticed in some teenagers, not teenagers, I guess a teenager would be a teen that's really tan. Or maybe it's not a thing. Probably it's not a thing at all. And here, not live because you're not watching this live. This is pre-recorded. But at the time that I was recording this, I made history by accidentally coming up with a word that's not a thing. But now it is, right? Which is yet another reason to subscribe to my podcast, because I accidentally come up with words. That's how brilliant I am. Anyways, Sheen points out that desire to be noticed in some teenagers is demonstrated by how loud some of them are. Maybe you were a loud teenager. Was I a loud teenager? That's a great question. I think so. I think I was a loud teenager. Yeah. If I'm being honest, I think I think I was a loud teacher. Did I want attention? I think so. I think yeah, I think I wanted it. I think I wanted attention. I mean, some of you might accuse me of still wanting attention, right? Like, why else would I start a YouTube channel? Why else would I start a podcast? Why else would I invite you to listen to my podcast, invite you to listen to, not listen to, well, yeah, listen and watch my YouTube videos? Why else would I put out IGTVs on my Insta? If you follow me on Insta, you know I'm pretty active on my Instagram story. So a lot of it is just me talking to my front-facing camera on my smartphone. So why would I do that if I didn't want attention? Okay, cool. Fourth, wait, before I move on. So Sheen says the loudness attracts attention, but it also, because before I went on a rant about myself, I was summarizing, and I mentioned that teenagers demonstrate the desire to be noticed by how loud they are, and then I went into my rant. But the loudness attracts the attention, so that satisfies that desire to be noticed. But in addition to satisfying that desire, it has a sense of rebellion and affirmation that the teenager that's being loud is living how he or she wants. Okay, cool. Fourth paragraph. Sheen points out that along with having an impenetrable personality, nailed it. I was nervous about that word. Impenetrable personality, the teenager begins to imitate. He or she rebels those that govern him or her. But they rebel by imitating fleeting impressions. Fleeting impressions. Sheen says that when we were teenagers, and when we were teenagers, we were like chameleons that take on the color of the object we're placed on. Sheen points out teenagers can become heroes or bandits depending on the environment, depending on what they read, or depending on their companions, right? He says the spirit of imitation reveals itself in the dress, and he gives examples that were specific to his time and I'm not sure apply anymore. I think that the concept does apply though. Teenagers dress differently than even older teenagers, let alone adults. If you take someone that's 13, they dress different than someone that's 19, right? The 13-year-old might dress similar to other 13-year-olds. The 19-year-old might dress similar to other 19-year-olds. But if then you add an adult to that, I guess in this case an adult, well, even if you take a 20-year-old adult and an adult in their late 20s and then an adult in their 30s, they dress different as well. So I think that's why I think that the concept does apply, but the specific examples that he provided, I don't think that they apply. So, but for some reason, teenagers dress different than adults, right? Sheen seems to be saying it's the spirit of imitation. So yeah, I think someone who's 13, a bunch of 13-year-olds might dress similar, but they're probably imitating a trend. Maybe. I will say that before this paragraph ends, so I'm summarizing the fourth paragraph. Before the paragraph ends, Sheen says sometimes teenagers fashion their hair like the savages of Oceania. So I guess Oceania includes islands located in the central and southern Pacific Ocean. It comprises Australia, New Zealand, also part of Polynesia, neighboring islands in the Pacific Ocean, and the island of New Guinea, also included in region of Melanesia. That's according to mapsoftheworld.com. But if you Google Oceania, which I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing right, if you Google Oceania people or people of Oceania, they're brown. They're brown people. So there you go. Fulton Sheen is a white Irish American, right? And he called brown people savages. So therefore, he's racist. Just kidding. Some people might follow, like some people might apply that logic, and then some people might not ever read Sheen now because he said that. So why am I even mentioning it? Well, some of you might read this book and then wonder why I didn't mentioning it. What I think is that he was pointing out that teenagers grow out their hair, because in the Google images some of the people of Oceania have long hair. But anyway, I'm not going to assume anything. I'm not going to assume he was racist against people of Oceania or had a prejudice against people of Oceania. I don't know why he called them savages. I don't know what was going on in Oceania in 1954. Am I biased because I'm a fan of Fulton Sheen? Absolutely, I'm biased. Yeah, I'll admit that. But I could be biased, and there could be a legitimate explanation that we don't know about. One doesn't cancel out the other. And keep in mind, 66 years from now, someone is going to judge you on what you left behind on the internet. This wasn't on the internet, this was in the book. And they're going to be judging you based on the standards 66 years from now, which we don't know what they're going to be. So someone might accuse you of something that you don't think you are, or that you don't think anyone would ever accuse you of. So same goes for me 66 years from now. Someone is going to be like, that guy was the worst, and they'd be correct. So think what you want. You're not going to find a perfect public figure. And I think before I say this next part, so today, or at least in recent years, it might not be a thing anymore, but like savage is used in slang almost as a compliment. Like when you say he or she is a savage, it's almost like they're really good at something. I don't know, because I'm older and I don't know what the words mean. I've heard it said, and I'm trying to like recall the context, and I'm pretty sure it meant like when you call someone a savage, it's like they're good at whatever it is that they're like doing. So that the reason I mentioned that is because like 66 years ago, they couldn't have foreseen that savage would have been a good thing. You know what I mean? So we don't know what the standards are going to be 66 years from now, which is why a lot of us crave an objective standard, which is a future episode. But what I was saying was that you're not going to find a perfect public figure ever, except the Lord Jesus Christ, and he was and is literally perfect, and we crucified him for it. So I guess it makes sense that we want to call imperfect people names, like racist, based off of one thing that they wrote in a book, and categorize them negatively. Okay, cool. So, fifth paragraph. Sheen points out that there aren't many natural leaders among teenagers. Most are content to be followers, which he sees as a danger because he points out character is the ability to say no. That's how he defines character, as the ability to say no. So I find this next part really interesting. I highlighted it. That's how you know it's serious. Sheen points out that unless education can train a teenager's will, many teenagers will slip into adulthood and become slaves of propaganda and public opinion the rest of their lives. So that's a big deal. He seems to be saying that training a teenager's will is a big deal. That's what I meant by that. Because otherwise, there's this negative consequence from not training a teenager's will. The negative consequence would be we become adults and we become slaves of propaganda and public opinion the rest of our lives. He ends paragraph 5 by pointing out that to create is to recognize the spirit in things, and to imitate is to submerge personality to the lowest level of the mass. So Sheen is pointing out that if our wills aren't trained starting in our teenage years, we'll be imitators of the lowest level of public opinion because we don't know how to say no. Okay, cool. Sixth and final paragraph. And most of you are probably gone, so I can say whatever I want at this point. Shrimp noodle mailbox. That's usually my go-to. There's a story behind it. I'll tell you guys later if you remind me and if you're nice to me. Sheen points out that elders shouldn't be too hard on teenagers when they rebel against them. Let's pause right there. So if you asked teenagers 66 years ago, and if you ask teenagers today in 2020 if they think that their elders are too hard on them, I'm pretty sure that they would say yeah, they're too hard on me. And if we said, it's a similar question, but it's a question with like an ideal built into it. The premise of the question includes an ideal. So if we ask them, do you think they should be hard on you, right? Anytime that you ask a question that includes like should or ought to be, like if you were to phrase it, do you think your elders ought to be hard on you, right? There's an ideal built into the question, because they would be answering ideally, no, they shouldn't be hard on me, right? So I think the former question, do you think your parents, or not parents, elders, your parents are included in your elders, could be your grandparents as well, could be a coach, could be older siblings, could be older extended family like uncles, aunts, older cousins. Do you think your elders are too hard on you? I think they'd say yes. And then if you were to ask, do you think they should be? They would say no. So that's another way that this is still relevant today. So the reason that Sheen says teens rebel is that they're rebelling not against elders necessarily. They're not rebelling against elders for the sake of rebelling against elders, right? They're rebelling because the elders didn't give them a purpose in life or a goal, which is interesting. So they're almost rebelling because they have a sense, or they carry a sense that they have nowhere to go, that their life doesn't have purpose or meaning or maybe value. By the way, this is the longest of the 6 paragraphs, so bear with me, and thank you so much for your patience. So Sheen points out that teenagers don't know why they rebel. They lack the knowledge. They just rebel and they don't know why. So we should pause right there. I mean, I think a lot of times when you ask teenagers anything, this is not to say that they're dumb or idiots or stupid, right? But a lot of times when you ask teenagers, why did you do what you did, if it was like a bad action that they did or something like that. I think a lot of times they say, I don't know, and Sheen seems to be saying, especially if it was an act of rebellion, he seems to be saying that they don't know why they do it, right? And I think it goes back to what he was saying earlier about how the purpose of education in the context of teenagers is to train their will, because like if you don't know why you're rebelling and it gets you into trouble, sometimes it might not always get you into trouble. You want to get that in check, right? Because if you train your will and you have an urge or a desire to rebel, but you can say no to yourself, then you won't find yourself, you're less likely to find yourself in a bad situation. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Right? We're at about minute 35, so if you want to reach out to me and be like, hey, what you were talking about at about minute 35, I don't know what you meant, I'll take the time to explain it to you because I care about you. But as I was saying, Sheen points out that they rebel because the society that they live in hasn't given him or her a pattern of life. He says that most of the education that most of the education that teenagers received, and again, this is in 1959, this is 66 years ago, he's saying that they didn't stress restraint, discipline, or self-control, but rather they've been told by many of their educators that freedom and even democracy is the right to do whatever you please. So again, not self-restraint, not discipline, not self-control. I think some people would disagree with that. I don't want to give a caricature argument or a weak argument on their behalf. But then at the same time, some people would agree with that. And if we fast forward to today, if we ask people what they think about education today, I think you would still have that divide. Some people would say that education doesn't stress restraint enough or discipline or self-control, and that they define freedom and democracy as to you just can do whatever you want. And then there'd be people like, no, I disagree with that, right? And I think I'm of the opinion, I agree with Fulton Sheen. That's why I'm talking about Fulton Sheen, and I could make an argument for it, but I don't want to make an argument for it if I can't give the best representation for the counter side. And I guess I just didn't put that much thought. I guess I didn't realize when I was typing up this Google document, because at this point everyone knows that I'm reading off of a Google document. I guess I didn't think to make an argument against what Sheen was saying specifically, because I'm assuming, this is me assuming, I have no indication of this, I'm assuming that Sheen was talking about public education in 1959. And that's what I'm talking about today. I'm of the opinion, and I'm not going to give you my argument for it, that yes, in 2020, public education doesn't stress restraint or discipline or self-control. And I also think that they defined freedom and even democracy as the right to do whatever you please. And I reject. I don't adopt that definition. I don't think freedom is the right to do literally whatever I please, literally whatever I want. I don't believe I have complete autonomy over my body. I don't think anybody does. That's why, I'll just give you a small example. That's why, for example, we created a law that prohibits you from murdering someone unless it's in the case, and you have to prove it, unless it's in the case of self-defense, because you don't have complete autonomy over, you literally can't do whatever you want with your body. And someone might say, well, in that case you're hurting someone else. And I would say yes, but that's the point. If I literally had complete autonomy over my body, I would be able to kill someone, because in order to kill someone, you do it with your body. Even if you use an instrument like a knife or a gun or what have you, you're still the one doing it, and you're doing it with your body. So you don't have complete, there's at least that exception, and if there's that exception, there's more exceptions. So the more exceptions that we add, the less the further away we get from where we started, which is complete autonomy. So we have some autonomy over our body, right? We have we can do some things freely with our body, but not everything. I hope that makes sense. We're at about minute 40. I'm going to say the same thing. We're about minute 40. If that doesn't make sense to you, reach out to me. I promise you I'll take the time to explain it better, because the way that it makes sense to me, that it might not make sense to you in that way, or the way that I think, think I'm saying it might not be the actual way that I'm saying it, right? From here to here, I might have made a mistake. Alright, so then Sheen asserts that the rebellion that we had when we were teenagers, and that teenagers tend to have, right? Once that's over, teenagers are looking for something, right? And they're looking for something to give themselves completely to. That's interesting. I think we see examples of that today, of teenagers that have become public figures for different causes. Right? I'm sure you can think of an example. Sheen also asserts teens have no greater object of worship than to wrap their emotional lives around a movie hero, a movie star, a band singer, or just a singer. Which is also interesting, because this was 66 years ago, but I think today in 2020, I think we also still see examples of this. Usually popular movies or TV series or even book series are popular with young people. And when I say young people, I mean teenagers, 13 to 19. I think the same is true for movie and TV actors and actresses. Usually the popular ones are popular because of the young people who are fanatics and have anywhere from a mild to a strong devotion to their work. And of course, singers, I don't think it's a stretch to say many young people have a devotion to their favorite singer or rapper. For our time, for 2020, this is true of popular social media figures. Usually a lot of their followers are young people. So back to Sheen, he implies that this devotion young people tend to have for movie heroes and actresses and singers and popular social media figures, that part I'm adding, that this is a sign of a decaying civilization. But he says once this sign of a decaying civilization hits catastrophe, teenagers will look for a different kind of thing to imitate. So the thing Sheen says they'll try to imitate, the teenagers, after a catastrophe happens. So I don't know what a catastrophe means. I guess it could mean a life-changing event in a teenager's life where they realize they need to go beyond their devotion to these things, or as I like to say, tings. Or maybe it's a bigger life-changing event in terms of scale. Something life-changing happens in an entire city, or an entire state, or an entire country, or maybe even multiple countries, and then a lot of teenagers, not just one, or not just an individual teenager, but a lot of teenagers realize that they need to shift their devotion past these things to something greater, right? The social media figures and or singers that I mentioned, for example, that they need to shift their devotion to something greater than that. I guess I didn't mention that you can, and I can, and teenagers can be devoted to multiple things, or as I like to say, tings, which I got from my wife. Full disclosure. she's probably going to be upset that I didn't mention that until minute 44, but I have mentioned it in previous episodes. I gave the backstory to why I pronounce things tings. If this is your first time watching one of my YouTube videos, or if you're listening to the audio on the podcast, then maybe you should binge on the rest of my stuff so you can find this story. I don't remember in which episode that I talked. I think it might have been in the Fulton Sheen episode, now that I think about it. So listen to the Fulton Sheen episode, like I said. But I didn't mention, right, that we can be devoted to multiple things. Like me, for instance, I have somewhat of a devotion to philosophy. That's why I'm studying it. That's why it's my major. Out of everything else, I picked philosophy, and I've taken a lot of philosophy classes. I've read a lot of philosophy, both for class, both for, I guess you could say, pleasure. And the same with strength training and my wife and my son. And the biggest thing that I'm devoted to is my Catholic faith. But even I'm devoted to some things, or as I like to say, things that teenagers tend to have a devotion to as well. I have an Instagram account, like I already mentioned, at DannyFlow, DANI_FLO. I follow a lot of Instagram famous people, or influencers, if you will. Sometimes I follow them on multiple platforms. So I follow them on Instagram, and if they have a YouTube channel and I like their content, I subscribe to their YouTube channel. If they have a Snapchat, I'll add them. I'll look at what they post on their Snapchat story. If I like it, I'll keep them. If they have a podcast, I listen to some episodes. If I like what they talk about, then I subscribe, right? So I'm devoted to some of these same things that teenagers are. Maybe I'm immature. That's a possibility. I mean, I choose to pronounce things tings. So what more evidence do you need? Or there could be a difference in the degree of devotion. I'm not as devoted to these type of things, or as I like to say, tings, as they are, the teens. And for the most part, except maybe with the exception of strength training, teenagers probably think philosophy and marriage and having kids, and especially Catholicism, is lame, and that it's for old people. And maybe that's why I'm into it, right? I'm not young anymore. My time is past. It's over. Done. Give it up already. What other sign do you need? Okay, Cole. I never told you that what teenagers will try to imitate after some type of catastrophe happens, I guess it will, what they'll try to imitate is either heroes or saints. So there seems to be a difference for Sheen between a hero and a saint. I don't know what that is for Sheen. I'm not going to speak on behalf of Sheen, but I guess to me, not all heroes are saints, but all saints are heroes. Does that make sense? Probably not. If you listen to my episode on the mini introduction to Fulton Sheen, which is, I think this is like the third or fourth time that I mentioned that episode, I gave a brief explanation between the difference between a saint and a canonized saint. So a saint for Catholics is anybody in heaven. So we actually literally don't know how many saints there are. A canonized saint is a saint that we do know about, that we do know is in heaven. And the reason we know that is because it's been revealed by the Holy Spirit, and the Catholic Church has a process to determine that. So everyone in heaven, I imagine everyone in heaven is a hero, but not every hero goes to heaven. I might be wrong. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. I'm not a psychic, but I know that I will be wrong again. So I could be wrong about this. I've been wrong before. I've seen me be wrong. I can't imagine anyone in heaven not being heroic, but it could be possible that someone who has done a heroic thing, or as I like to say, ting, or multiple heroic things, or as I like to say, tings, could not make it to heaven. How could that happen? Or how would that happen? How could that happen? How would that happen? Well, if you believe in sin, which I think everyone should, I do. I think I have good reasons to. I'll give those to you one day. You get to heaven by repenting of your sins, having faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and getting baptized, right? So you could, in theory, and unfortunately, it is probably the case, be a hero. Hero. What is a hero? Be a hero. My wife is going to love this episode. Let me tell you. My wife loves it when I mispronounce anything. She's so quick to it it gives me a lot of like, I guess, joy or happiness. It makes me laugh. It makes me like her reaction to me mispronouncing things like makes me. I don't do it on purpose. I don't mispronounce stuff on purpose. It just happens. And so I've mispronounced a bunch of stuff already. So my wife is a saint. She listens to me talk all day, and then she also listens to my podcast. She gives me really good feedback. So hopefully she's made it this far. If not, baby, I understand. But by now she's probably having a great time because I've mispronounced so many things, and I just lost my place. Okay, so I was talking about not being able to imagine a saint not being heroic, and I was explaining how someone could be a hero but not be a saint. So it's probably the case that someone who has done heroic things for some reason, for like a personal reason, they died not repenting of their sins. That seems possible. So maybe that's the distinction or difference between a hero and a saint. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know however you want. You can DM me on Insta. You can Snapchat me if you've added me on Snapchat. You can comment here below on YouTube, or you can send me a voice message on Anchor. Whatever you want. Okay, cool. I should really finish summarizing. So Sheen mentions that it's sad that the youth has never rallied around heroes. He might have been using hyperbole. He probably meant it's not often the case that teens, or that the youth, the same thing, right? The youth, the teens. He probably meant it's not often the case the youth has ever rallied around heroes. And that's because Sheen says teenagers are not ready for a solid ideal. That might mean they're not mature enough. If I know one thing about teenagers, though, is that they don't want to be told they're not mature enough. They want to be treated like adults. However, a lot of times, no offense to my teenage friends and listeners, all zero of you. I mean, I know teens. I work with some teens. Some of them have listened to some of my episodes, which I really appreciate. If you're listening now, please keep listening. So I was being hyperbolic. So it at least seems teenagers want to be treated like adults, but want to act like teenagers. And unfortunately, as you will learn, as I did, as many adults have learned throughout human history, you cannot have it both ways. Very rarely can you have it both ways. And if you do have it both ways, if you're a teenager that wants to be treated like an adult and is treated like an adult but still acts like a teenager, just know that there are consequences in the form of hard lessons. Alright? So Sheen says the time will eventually come when teenagers want something more solid. Doesn't say when. Maybe after the unknown catastrophe, or maybe in their late teen years, 17, 18, 19. I think around that time is when teenagers kind of get tired of teenage life. They want something more. Around that time, they start thinking about life after high school, start thinking about college, start applying for college. They're driving, they have a part-time job, they're dating, hopefully with their parents' permission, but probably not. So I think all of these experiences make them start to think. Hopefully they'll listen to the Danny Flow podcast, where my purpose is to teach you how to think well. This entire podcast, I've just been telling you what I think, what could be, and why it could be that way. So yeah, subscribe, but don't just subscribe. Share my podcast, share my YouTube, share my Insta. That'd be that'd be cool. And you could be one of my besties. And who doesn't want to be my bestie? I've met me. I make myself laugh every once in a while. I'll make you laugh every once in a while. I've been working on my dad jokes and my dad humor. So far it's pretty bad, but I'm gonna get it down. I promise. Okay, cool. So after teenagers are ready for a more solid ideal, Sheen has a warning for education. I think this is the second or third time he mentions education, and again, I'm assuming he means public education. Sheen says that education shouldn't give them false sacrificial gods, which could be an apparent hero or an apparent saint, but in the end, not worth the sacrifice. You don't lose now to gain something later, you just lose. A sacrifice is giving something up of value now to get something back of even greater value later, right? So false man, my wife is gonna have a great time with this episode. So false sacrificial gods would only make you lose something of value, and you wouldn't get anything back. You might lose time and therefore your youth. It might be money, it might be effort, it could be a number of things, or as I like to say, things. So Sheen then asserts the capacity to be brave and heroic is in every teenager, which, how does he know that? That's a great question. Probably because teenagers are humans, and we know from history and seeing it for ourselves as in witnessing it, humans can be brave and heroic. Sometimes those humans are very young, like a teenager. So he says that capacity will come to the surface. He hopes and prays to God it will be for heroes and saints that teenagers will center this affection. And here I think he means influence. I think Sheen is saying this capacity of bravery and heroism should be influenced by heroes and saints, not false sacrificial gods. That is entirely every and each teenager's choice, which I think is why he hopes and prays it will turn out that way. I certainly do. So then Sheen says the ascetic ideal has passed from the elders. What is ascetic or asceticism? That's a great question. So that usually means self-denial in order to be self-disciplined. If you Google it, the word asceticism, it says it's usually for religious reasons, which I think is true, but I mean, you could do it for the sake of the virtue of self-discipline if you take something non-religious, like business, working your way up in a business, or even being an entrepreneur and starting your own business and successfully running your own business. One of the things you will consistently hear from people that are successful or considered successful is it took a lot of discipline, and they got that discipline by denying themselves a lot of things, or as I like to say, tings. They denied themselves a stuff that they want now or wanted at the time for things, or as I like to say, things that they thought were more valuable but didn't have at the time, but that they eventually wanted to have. So they did what they thought they had to do to get them, and that included not getting the stuff that they wanted at the time. So you can think of it as that way as well. Sheen continues by asserting that God sends fresh generations to give the world a fresh start. So Sheen is asserting asceticism is going to be brought back not by the elders, but by the youth, by the teens. Sheen then ends by asserting teens will find the right ideals in God and country, but specifically God. And he asserts that the function of religion is to make it possible to men to sacrifice. And in egotism and even in pure reason, this isn't possible. So that's how it ends. I sprinkled a little bit of my commentary throughout. Maybe I can save what I have to say for another episode, but what do you think? What do y'all think? Especially if you're a teen, age 13 to 19, which probably none of you are. I'm starting to think that YouTube is definitely a multi-generation thing, from young to old, but I'm starting to think that podcasts are more of a millennial thing. Of course there's outliers, there's people older than millennials and people younger than millennials listening to podcasts. What I'm saying is, for the most part, it seems to be a millennial thing, or as I like to say, ting. I'm a millennial. Millennials now, according to the almost omniscient Google, are 23 to 38. I'm 27, so anyone younger than 23 is a post-millennial, Gen Z, or Zoomer. Those seem to be used interchangeably. And I'm not a trendsetter, so Zoomers are probably not listening to me. But if you are a teen, tell me what you think and share this episode with your friends. So everyone, I'm talking to everyone, think about it. What did you find interesting? What did you agree with and why? What did you disagree with and why? What do you think is true about what Sheen wrote about teens? What do you think is false and why? What about my sprinkled commentary? Did you like it? No, I don't. don't answer that question. So what did you think about it in the sense of, like, was my commentary accurate? Was it inaccurate? What do you think about teens in general? What is a teen to you? What is a teen to you? What's your definition of a teen? Is it more than just being 13 to 19? Let me know. Please send me a DM on Instagram at DannyFlow, DANI_FLO. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Send me a snap. If you've added me on Snapchat, send me a voice message on Anchor. The link is below in the description of this video, or in the description of the podcast episode description on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. So let me know however you want. I'll put a link to the book below if you want to buy this book and read it. It's, like I said, it's a relatively short book, 170 pages. And if you read it, let me know. And if you read it, then that means that you're further along than me, because I'm only 126 pages in, and honestly I don't think I'll finish it anytime soon, because I'm in the middle of the I'm almost at the middle of the fall 2020 spring 2020 semester, and so I've got to do a lot of reading for class. Link to support the Danny Flow podcast below, to support me financially. Please consider it if you like this podcast and you want to see me and you want to help me grow the podcast, and you want to add a monetary value to it. If not, that's totally cool. Please keep listening anyway, and share my podcast with your bestie and your nextie bestie. Please share it on your IG stories, and subscribe or follow my podcast and YouTube channel so that you know when I upload a new episode. So thanks for putting up with me. Let me know what you think, however you want. I gave you a bunch of different options. We're a fan of thinking here on the Danny Flow podcast. We like thinking here on the Danny Flow podcast, so I want to know what you think. Till next time, my guys and my girls, aka my dear and beloved Danny Flowist, remember what servant of God Archbishop Fulton Sheen taught us: your life is worth living. Love you guys. Bye.